NASCAR has the state of the sport on Friday, where they talked about fourth manufacturer, changing the championship race, the playoffs, and the race manipulation from Martinsville. A judge delivered a devastating blow to 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports on Friday as well. Plus, the teams that wanted to appeal their race manipulation penalties, things didn't go so well for them. Welcome back to Break Hard. I'm Matt. I hop into a meeting for 1 hour on Friday from 12:30 until 1:30, and all chaos breaks loose. I knew the state of the sport was going to happen. I knew at some point today the judge in the 23XI Racing Front Row Motorsports injunction hearing was going to release his decision. Just didn't expect it all to happen right when I was in that meeting. Unfortunate, but let's get into the NASCAR state of the sport. Every year, the Friday of the championship weekend, Steve Phelps and Steve O'Donnell come out from NASCAR and talk about the current state of the series, of the sport as a whole. And on Friday, we got those remarks. And typically, it's a good time to get like pretty candid remarks from both of them. And it started off with Steve Phelps talking about how they've had double-digit race sellouts this year and how the ratings are up year over year, only in the single-digit percentage, but it's still a big increase, especially after having some of their biggest marquee events hit by rain and weather delays. The Daytona 500, the Clash being moved up a day, Chicago being delayed by rain, the Coke 600 getting rained out, humidity out, whatever you want to say there. For them to still be up is rather impressive, and to have double-digit sellouts as well really goes against all the people in the comments that are like, look at the racetracks, nobody's going to the races. I've been to a bunch of races this year, and I'll tell you, the grandstands are very, very crowded, which is an absolute win for NASCAR. They went on to talk about a few other things that happened. They were not willing to talk about charters because obviously there's ongoing litigation for that. So that makes sense altogether. We'll get to the litigation part in the next segment. They also go on to discuss what happened at Martinsville this past weekend with the race manipulation. And Steve O'Donnell was very candid, and he said, to an extent, he said, Bill France always said that pissed off is not a good plan. Being pissed off is not a good plan, which I agree with that. Rational heads will always prevail. But he said after Martinsville, he was pissed off. And they had a call with their OEMs this week where they laid out their expectations going forward, and they will 1,000% have a rule for 2025 that allows them to fine and penalize the manufacturers if something like this happens again. O'Donnell said that he is very confident nothing will happen this weekend at Phoenix. And I think we should all believe him on that, because he said that he was pissed off and NASCAR was pissed off, which means it probably went all the way to the top. And I would imagine the big dog there and Jim France wasn't very happy with what he saw at Martinsville, and they probably sent a strongly worded message in that call with the OEMs this week. Speaking of OEMs, Steve Phelps was asked about the possibility of adding in a fourth OEM. Now, of course, NASCAR in the talk of a fourth OEM coming in is a lot like IndyCar talking about adding a race, and they never actually do it. NASCAR has been talking about adding a fourth OEM since Dodge departed the series at the end of the 2012 season. Haven't seen one happen yet. Obviously, they flirted with Dodge coming back a few years ago. That's just not going to happen. If Dodge wanted to be a NASCAR, Dodge would be a NASCAR. Stellantis is hemorrhaging money. They're not about to take on a NASCAR Cup Series program at that. Honda seems like the best bet. That is a name that we continue to hear. That is a manufacturer that is looking to decide what its future is in IndyCar going forward. And if they decide to pivot from that, well, they're looking at putting that budget and obviously more into a NASCAR program, which would be certainly interesting. According to Phelps and O'Donnell, the other OEMs are on board with the possibility of adding a fourth one, whoever that may be. Honda, again, is the name that keeps coming out. But it would be good for the sport. It's good for the health of the sport. Another manufacturer means more competitive race cars, and that is never a bad thing. It means more money coming into the sport. Also, never a bad thing. They also talked about the possibility of the championship race moving. They said that Phoenix does a really good job. It sells out, the activation. Everybody seems to like Phoenix, other than the fact that nobody seems to like the on-track product. I completely am with them. They sell out the racetrack. Granted, it's only 42 to like 45,000 people, but a sellout still looks good. They have big time activation there. Phoenix likes having the championship race. If the on-track activity would actually, be representative of how great the rest of the event is, I don't think people would complain. But unfortunately, we just watched the race that used to hold the championship weekend hold one of the best Cup Series races we've ever seen. And now we go to Phoenix, which hasn't had a good race since '88. So it's kind of this toss-up there. But they did mention that they would explore the possibility of potentially holding the championship race in a place like Darlington, Las Vegas, or even Charlotte, which is super interesting because I never thought we would see the day where ISC would give up the championship race to an SMI racetrack. Now, obviously, this is all talk, nothing set in stone. Would it even happen? I'm not sure about that. Darlington hosting the championship race would be very intriguing. Obviously, it is one of the oldest tracks on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule, if not the oldest in Martinsville. Whatever. It always puts on good racing. Darlington delivers banger after banger each and every year. The problem is you want to make it the championship race. That means that the Southern 500 on Labor Day weekend would likely have to shift its date. And we saw what happened the last time they did that and sent that date out to California. The fans were absolutely livid about it. So that one's kind of a bit of a toss-up. Las Vegas would be super interesting as well. Obviously, entertainment capital of the country, big-time event, city that knows how to hold big-time races. Would it put on a great championship race? It puts on good races right now in the Gen 7 era, so I think there's an argument to be made there. And then you have Charlotte. Obviously, with Charlotte, SMI has been pretty resilient in saying that they want the second date to be on the road course. They don't want the oval to have that second date. That way it gives them essentially two different races within the same calendar year. And if they want to make that the championship race, it's not going to be the road course. So that'll be something interesting that will have to play out. But of course, it is the home to NASCAR and all the teams are there. It would put on a big time event and it probably would do really good numbers in terms of attendance. So that would be interesting to see. And of course, the last 3 Coke 600s on that mile and a half with the Gen 7 car, bangers, other than the fact that it got humidityed out earlier this year. They also go on to say that the playoff format is not going away. They will always have the playoff format. Are there things that they might look at in the future? I think that is definitely something that's possible. But in terms of the playoff and the elimination style, that's here to stay. I know there's going to be half the fans that don't want to hear that, half the fans that do want to hear that. It's just what they're saying. Don't come at the messenger here. And then to cap it off, they talked about officiating. And Steve O'Donnell said that they do not have an officiating problem. And I actually tend to agree with him on that part. It's not so much that there's an officiating problem. It's the fact that I don't think NASCAR anticipates some of the things that the competitors are doing, like the race manipulation thing. I don't think they thought that the manufacturer would stoop that low to try to manipulate the outcome of a race. Now, do you want to see NASCAR speed up their officiating process? Like, do we want to sit around for 27 minutes waiting to hear if Christopher Bell's in or out? Yeah, I think that definitely is something that could be sped up. I think race control has some cleanup to make overall, but for the most part, they're not making bad decisions. I think it's just more of like a time issue where you're like, I wish that would have, been sooner. I wish we would have heard about that sooner. I wish that would have just got done quicker. And obviously that's every sport, right? Like NFL replay takes forever sometimes. MLB replay takes forever, more times than not, and they still get it wrong. At least on the NASCAR side of things, typically when they take their time, they're getting it correct. It's just a long time to get it done every now and then. So that's what the state of the sport was all about. Had a lot of things to say. I think that the sport is, contrary to what people think, I think that the current leadership is better than what we've had in years past, and the sport is headed in a positive direction. People are going out to the racetrack. People are watching on TV. New manufacturer wants to come in. New owners want to come in as well. I think that things are trending upwards. 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports were delivered a devastating blow on Friday afternoon when federal judge Frank D. Whitney released his ruling on whether or not he would grant an injunction to 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports that would allow them to compete in 2025 under the charter agreement. He denied that request for an injunction. That means that the teams will now have to prepare to race as open cars next season. They, of course, do have the opportunity to appeal this, and they absolutely will appeal this as well. The big argument from the team side of things and from Jeffrey Kessler was that racing without charters means that the teams could likely lose their drivers, could lose their sponsorships, and could lose a ton of money in the process because of all this. The judge essentially said, you're working in hypotheticals right now. We need absolutes here. You need to prove that you would actually lose the money from the sponsorships and your drivers leaving the team. So that's what 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports will now have to prove, because as it currently stands, like I said, we're dealing in hypotheticals here, which in the court of law isn't going to work out. So now Jeffrey Kessler is going to have to go back to the kitchen. He's got to cook up a new way to and how to present this, or he's going to need to prove to that judge that these teams would not survive racing as open cars in 2025. Now, of course, the teams have said openly multiple times that they will race as open cars in 2025, which is probably something they should have been quiet about. But I will say this, teams will be getting more money than ever as part of the new TV revenue deal next year. So they could survive as open cars. It's going to get them a percentage increase over what the open cars get paid in 2025 versus 2024 this year. But there is, of course, as Jeffrey Kessler said, the possibility that Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace could leave the teams because they don't have charters for next season. Also, their sponsors could lead the team as well because they no longer have that guaranteed starting spot. They no longer have that guaranteed exposure to being in the race. Will they? Yeah, more than likely 40 cars aren't showing up every single weekend outside of, I don't know, the Daytona 500, maybe the Coke 600 or something else along the way. But for the most part, they will be in the race. They're just not going to be a chartered car. This is obviously not what 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports wanted to hear on Friday, but it is a big win for NASCAR. And if Jeffrey Kessler and the teams cannot prove what the judge is asking them to prove, there is the possibility that this case just gets thrown out entirely, which would throw a whole other wrench into this whole ongoing saga. So right now, NASCAR is still continuing with their plans to only have 32 chartered cars next year. They would not talk about the 2 charters from Stewart-Haas Racing that those 2 teams have bought. Obviously, it sounds like they might just really be waiting on the paperwork, the transfer paperwork to come over before all of that happens. But as it currently stands, NASCAR preparing for 32 charters in 2025. On Thursday afternoon, Trackhouse went before the National Motorsports Appeals Panel and attempted to prove their innocence and have their race manipulation penalty from Martinsville dropped. Ultimately, the National Motorsports Appeals Panel said, "No, it's not going to happen." This is actually what they said. They said, quote, "We feel in the best interest of racing and to protect the integrity of the sport, it was appropriate to uphold and affirm NASCAR's decision with regard to the NASCAR Rule 4.4 attempting to manipulate the outcome of a race," which is absolutely what they should have done. They need to protect the integrity of the sport, and allowing race manipulation like that to happen is going to do a ton of harm to the sport. So they needed to uphold and stand behind NASCAR and NASCAR's penalty that was issued here. So as it currently stands, Trackhouse will still have to pay the $100,000 for Ross Chastain, the $100,000 for the team, obviously 50 points in driver, 50 points in owner, and then crew chief, spotter, and team exec all suspended. Well, after the Trackhouse appeal, there's supposed to be an RCR appeal, and they saw what happened to Trackhouse and the buzzsaw that they ran into, and they were like, we're just going to go ahead and withdraw our appeal here because we've already been through this process once back at Richmond. Didn't work out for us there, and it's not going to work out for us here. 2311 Racing announced on Thursday morning that they had also decided not to appeal the penalty as well, meaning that all 9 people suspended will be suspended for this weekend's race, and $600,000 in fines will have to be paid out, and then, of course, the 300 in points, 150 driver and 150 owner will all be deducted as well. And obviously, this was never going to get overturned. They were never going to get a reduction in the penalty. This is something that NASCAR needed to be tough on, and probably if the rules would have allowed it, been tougher on, which they absolutely will have the ability to do that next year as well. So going forward, I hope we don't see any more race manipulation, but hey, 9 people won't be at the racetrack this weekend. I think Brett Griffin is flying in to be the spotter for Austin Dillon, as well as Jesse Love this weekend. Darian Grubb is going to be the crew chief over at Trackhouse for Ross Chastain this weekend. A lot of just random people moving around and having to show up for this final race of the season. Ultimately, for Booty Barker, it means that he does not get to crew chief Bubba Wallace one last time in the Cup Series. So Martinsville was the end of it for him going forward. And for everybody else, have to wait for 2025 before they're back at the racetrack. So we have the Truck Series race on Friday night. I looked at the averages. We haven't had qualifying yet as of the recording of this video. I looked at practice from Thursday night. I'm going to go with Corey Heim to win the championship on Friday night. Interested to hear what everybody else's thoughts are. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the comments what you thought about state of the sport, what you thought about the 2311 FRM ruling, as well as the appeals just never really even having a chance. Like and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on TikTok at BreakHard, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at BreakHardBlog.